Good morning, everyone. In our last discussion, we had talked about this chapter, the portrait of a lady in general. We have already covered the summary, word meanings, and some basic analysis so far. Today, in this last discussion, we will analyze the text thematically. One can find several themes in such a loaded text as the portrait, but here we will limit ourselves to the most important themes which are relevant to our purpose as well. But before we start our discussion, let's take a look at the themes we are going to discuss today. So, in the themes that we will analyze today are culture conflict, the universal tragedy, the Fate Sisters imagery, the animal imagery, the bane of loneliness, and silence, the language of protest or contentment. So, let's begin with the cultural conflict. You see, Khushwant Singh was born in what now is Pakistan and he breathed his last in India. He was a born Sikh and at the same time a production of Western education and culture. His writings are therefore a realistic way of tracing back to his own roots. His realistic lenses sometimes examine the partition from the humanistic perspective, for example, as in A Train to Pakistan, or sometimes it witnesses a city as it lives, breathes, and changes. For example, in Delhi, a novel. The onslaught on his religious values during the Operation Blue Star, which intended to remove the militant religious leader Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale and his followers from the buildings of the Golden Temple complex, and the anti-Sikh riots in the wake of the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi, must have filled him with an immense sense of dislocation. All these conflicts come to life, albeit in a toned down, personal, homely experience in the portrait of a lady. Singh doesn't deal with the grand themes like partition in his story directly, but it is there, just not directly as partition. You see, he was born in that Punjab which now lies in Pakistan. There he lived with his grandmother Lakshmi Devi before joining his parents in Delhi around 1920. Though there was no India Pakistan division in those times, but this shift naturally resulted in a sense of dislocation for his grandmother, who had already spent a lifetime in the village. For Singh, it didn't mean much. He was only around 5 years of age at that time. The shift in location was clubbed with a shift in culture, not only a transition from a village community to an urban one, but also one from traditional Indian sensibilities to Western education and culture. More than the physical dislocation, this perhaps dealt a huge blow on her psyche. The friend that came to the city along with her was gradually getting pulled into the whirlpool of Western culture, and she could do nothing about it. The scriptures were replaced by Western signs, prayers with music and dance. The distance that was created thus between the grandmother and her grandson was irreparable, and, in a way, forced her to recede into a cocoon with none any more to share or pass on her values and beliefs. In a way, she represents the Indian culture itself as it was facing a slow death in the hands of Western culture. Next, we come to the universal tragedy. You see, life itself is tragic. It is essentially tragic in nature. The tragedy comes from its transitory nature. Whatever is there today, tomorrow it shall pass. Being alive is like standing on a seashore with the sea waves lapping. Just as the waves, people come and go, events happen and pass. And that is what which is tragic about life. And it is also what makes it so precious. Understanding this tragic nature of life makes living an elegant experience and makes our past appear in a nostalgic mellowness. The tragic part in the relationship between the grandmother and her grandson is that there is no one to blame for the apparent rift that was being created. It came as a natural progression of events. It was just there, the way it should have been. Her own son and daughter in law loved her. This is apparent from the fact that they didn't leave her behind in the village alone. They loved their own son too, and to give him a proper education, got him admitted to an English medium school. The rift came from not hatred or ignorance, but it came from love. In another way, what happened is not tragic at all, but life. When a bird is little, it lives in the shelter of its mother. But as it grows, it leaves its old nest and flies away to the vast unknown. Singh was growing up, and it was his time to leave the nest. In a way, he was fortunate that while his grandmother made his roots strong, his parents taught him to reach up to the sky. That is the universal nature of life, the world of the grandmother, the world that Singh inherited and was receding into the past, while the world that his parents gave him was the one that was about to shape his future. Now let's talk about the Fate sisters, a really significant, important theme. The Fate sisters in Greek mythology are considered to be the most powerful beings and the distributor of individual destinies of the mortals at their birth. The sisters were three in number: Clotho, the spinner, Lachesis, the allotter, and Atropos, the inflexible. The typical image of the Fate sisters associate them with a spinning wheel where Clotho spins the thread of life and Lachesis measures its allotted length, while Atropos cuts it off with her shears. This gets her name of Inflexible. The Fate sisters are also associated with time, where Atropos stands for the past, Clotho for the present, and Lachesis represents the future. The image that becomes constant for the grandmother in her final years captures her sitting in front of a spinning wheel. A bent woman clad in white with silver locks. Singh's description of her as the winter landscape in the mountains further establishes that inflexible element in her nature. She also appears as an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. However, her time in the city sees her getting lonely and detached from the family, taking recluse more in her prayers, and it is here that we find her in front of a spinning wheel. This image of hers relates her to the Fate sisters, more precisely to Atropos. It is as if, realizing that her role in family is coming to an end, she measures the length of her life on the spinning wheel, day after day without change, counting for that final hour. Her routine life, inflexible in all her personal chores, presents her as of inflexible nature. The only break in her routine comes after the return of her grandson from abroad. Her skipping the prayers and the death that followed resembles Atropos' cutting the thread of life with astute inflexibility. Next comes the animal imagery. Singh is known for the stark realism in his writing. The portrait is no different from his remaining works in this respect. The animal imagery materializes in the form of two everyday animals that we see: dogs on one hand and sparrows on the other. The stray dogs are in the village. Dogs are territorial by nature. They are extremely loyal too. On the other hand, sparrows, also known as house sparrows, tend to stick close to their home. They even reuse the same nest year after year. The grandmother was uprooted from her own territory. That she is protective of her own ideals and beliefs is clearly evident when she couldn't accept that her grandson was being taught something that was meant for only the harlots and beggars. Her disapproval was evident in her silence, yet she was loyal to her own family. It may appear that she clung to her life only to see her grandson return home. She connected with the sparrows who perhaps reminded her of her own lost home. The sparrows had the option to reuse their nest, but she was not given any option. Uprooted from the safety and security of her own nest and gradually separated from her grandson, she found recluse in those homebound birds who understood the language of love. This is evident from the way they came to pay her their last tribute. Finally, we come to the bane of loneliness. As people grow old, they become lonely. Their friends, relatives of their own age, their lifelong companions gradually pass away, and the longer they live, the lonelier they find themselves. True, they may have their own children and grandchildren to keep them company, but they do have their own lives, and the two seldom match cent percent. The two worlds are essentially different, and the generation gap further aggravates or worsens the situation. Once away from her home, her village, the temple, the stray dogs, the grandmother really became lonely. Her companion of old age, the narrator, her last friend, was also taken away from her by the Western culture. The rift that was started when the narrator started going to school was enhanced as he grew up, whether be it the need of privacy or higher education abroad. The grandmother was becoming lonelier day by day. She never protested, but Singh writes that she accepted her seclusion with resignation. This line brings out all the pathos in her life, her helplessness. She knows that this is the eternal nature of life, the ebb and flow, and she understands that she is powerless in front of it. Next, we come to the final part of our thematic analysis, and we analyze here silence. Whether is it a language of protest or contentment that remains to be seen in this discussion. Faced with dislocation, loneliness, a clash of ideals and beliefs, the old woman gradually withdrew into silence. The uprooting, the distance, nothing could elicit a verbal reaction from her. Was it a language of protest? To not give in, to not bring herself to the point where she has to give words to her own desires, perhaps only to see them get thwarted? Or was it her own sense of contentment? The source of human happiness is not outside, neither in somebody else. It is all within. And once she had found that fountain of happiness within her, perhaps through her prayers, perhaps in her gods, or perhaps in her own time spent with the sparrows, she was content and was immune to all the outside changes. Whatever might be the explanation, the grandmother remains an image of inflexibility. In a world marked by changes, she was indeed the infallible, unchangeable, like those silent mountains with roots deep beneath. Now, finally, let's talk about the person behind it all. We will have a vivid picture of the grandmother and we'll also try to understand why or whether the title, The Portrait of a Lady, is apt for this text or not. So, the image of the grandmother that Singh sketches in these pages is one that is traditional. It is one such portrait that even every Indian can relate to. He cannot but imagine her only in that old self, devoid of any youth or youthful frivolity, ever not even in the past. She, for him, is the eternal image of a grandmother. He sketches her features with great detail and a gentle care, her wrinkled face, bent posture, her spotless white dress, and the rosary moving continuously between her fingers as she hobbled in and around the house. Scene becomes almost lyrical when he compares her to the wintry landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment in his eyes. Such poetic description makes the love and admiration that Singh had for his grandmother quite plain and sets this text as a tribute for her. This makes the title of the text, The Portrait of a Lady, appear appropriate. So here we end our thematic analysis of this particular text. Hope you have understood the various themes that are being discussed in this video. I hope you understand the chapter as well. We end here today till we meet again.